He left his poor wife for the CEO's daughter, then saw his ex-wife sitting at the head of the boardroom. The day Ethan Cole signed his divorce papers, he believed he was finally cutting loose the one thing holding him back. Her name was Claire. For 9 years, she had been his wife, his quiet supporter, the woman who packed his lunches when he was broke, stayed awake when he worked late, and wore the same winter coat 3 seasons in a row so they could save for a house. Ethan used to call that loyalty. Then he started earning real money. After that, he began calling it smallness. He told himself Claire had no ambition. He told himself she was too comfortable with an ordinary life. He told himself he had changed and she had not. The truth was uglier. Ethan had become embarrassed by the woman who had loved him before anyone important knew his name. He had been promoted twice in 3 years at Westbridge Holdings, one of the largest private development companies on the East Coast. He now wore tailored suits, attended charity galas, drank expensive bourbon with executives, and knew people who never checked menu prices. Claire still drove a 6-year-old Honda. She still shopped with coupons. She still preferred dinner at home. And every time Ethan looked at her simple clothes, he saw the life he wanted to believe he had escaped. What Ethan did not know was that Claire's simplicity had never been caused by poverty. It had been a choice. And by the time he learned why, there would be nothing left for him to save. The morning of the divorce, rain tapped against the windows of the attorney's office in downtown Boston. Claire sat on one side of a polished conference table, Ethan sat on the other. Between them lay the final agreement. Their marriage reduced to 27 pages. Ethan kept checking his watch. Claire noticed. "You have somewhere to be?" she asked. He looked up. "A meeting." Claire gave a small nod. She did not ask what kind. She already knew. Ethan had a celebration dinner scheduled with Vanessa Pierce, the daughter of Westbridge's chief executive officer. Vanessa was everything Ethan now believed Claire was not. She wore designer dresses without checking the price. She traveled to Paris for weekends. She spoke casually about homes in Nantucket and Palm Beach. She moved through wealthy rooms as if every door had been built for her. And for the past 7 months, Ethan had been sleeping with her. Claire had discovered the affair in the quietest possible way. Not through lipstick on a collar. Not through a dramatic phone call. Not through a stranger's message. She had discovered it because Ethan started smiling at his phone in a way he had not smiled at her in years. One night, while he showered, the screen lit up beside her. Vanessa's message appeared in full. "I can't wait until you finally stop pretending that marriage matters." Claire had stared at those words for almost a minute. Then she placed the phone exactly where it had been. She did not scream when Ethan came out of the bathroom. She did not confront him. She did not ask for explanations. Instead, she waited. 3 weeks later, Ethan told her he wanted a divorce. He expected tears. He had prepared an entire speech about growing apart, wanting different things, and needing to become the person he was meant to be. Claire listened until he finished. Then she said, "All right." That was all. Her calmness offended him more than anger would have. Now, sitting in the attorney's office, that same calmness made him uneasy. The lawyer turned the papers toward Claire. "You understand the terms." Claire nodded. She was giving Ethan the house. She was asking for no support. She was taking only her personal belongings, her car, and a modest savings account held in her name. Ethan had been stunned when her lawyer proposed it. He assumed guilt had made her generous. Maybe she knew she had never been enough for him. Maybe, in some strange way, she understood he deserved a bigger life. He had actually told Vanessa that. "She knows I outgrew her," he had said. Vanessa laughed and kissed him. "She should be grateful you didn't make things harder." Claire signed the final page. Then she removed her wedding ring. For a moment, she held it between 2 fingers. 9 years sat inside that small circle of gold. The apartment they shared when Ethan had only 2 suits. The winter she worked extra shifts so he could take a certification course. The night his mother died, and he cried against Claire's shoulder until sunrise. The years she believed love could survive success. She placed the ring on the table. Ethan's eyes moved toward it. "You can keep it," she said. He frowned. "Why would I want it?" Claire looked at him for a long moment. "So you remember what you traded." Ethan almost laughed. He thought she was being dramatic. He would remember those words later. He would remember them in a boardroom full of people who knew exactly who Claire was. He would remember them when Vanessa stopped answering his calls. He would remember them when his office keycard no longer worked. But on that rainy morning, Ethan simply stood, buttoned his expensive jacket, and walked away from his wife for the last time, believing he had won. He had no idea the woman he had just divorced owned more of Westbridge Holdings than the CEO himself. And Claire had no intention of telling him. Not yet. Claire Bennett had been born into money so old that nobody in her family ever needed to announce it. Her grandfather, Samuel Bennett, had started with 3 construction trucks and a small contracting business in Rhode Island. By the time Claire was born, the Bennett family controlled land, logistics companies, hotels, commercial properties, and a network of investment trusts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But Claire's father, Thomas, had hated what wealth did to people around him. He watched cousins fight over inheritances. He watched strangers suddenly become friendly when they learned his last name. He watched his older brother marry a woman who loved private jets more than she loved him. So when Claire was 16, Thomas gave her an unusual piece of advice. Never tell someone what you have before you know what they value. Claire never forgot it. She attended a public university under her mother's maiden name. She rented ordinary apartments. She bought used cars. She worked, not because she needed to, but because her father insisted that money should make a person useful, not lazy. When Claire met Ethan at 24, he was ambitious, funny, broke, and completely uninterested in what she owned. He thought her father had run a small property business. Claire never lied exactly. When Ethan asked about her family, she said, "They work in real estate." That was true. When he asked whether her parents were comfortable, she said, "They're doing fine." That was also true. She never told him about trusts, holding companies, or the fact that her father quietly owned a significant stake in Westbridge through Bennett Capital. At the time, Westbridge was only one part of the family portfolio. Claire wanted a marriage that belonged to 2 people, not 2 bank accounts. For years, that seemed to be exactly what she had. Ethan proposed with a ring he could barely afford. Claire cried when she saw it. Not because it was large. It wasn't. She cried because he had saved for 11 months. They married in a small ceremony at a lakeside inn. Ethan apologized repeatedly because he could not give her something grander. Claire kissed him and said, "This is enough." And she meant it. For their first 5 years, they were happy. Not perfect, but happy. They fought about dishes and laundry. They worried about bills Ethan believed they had to worry about. Claire let him believe it because she wanted them to build their own life. She used income from her job and kept her family distributions invested. When Ethan struggled, she supported him emotionally, not by secretly solving every problem with money. Thomas approved. "He needs the chance to become himself," he told Claire, "and you need the chance to learn who that self is." The second part of that sentence proved more important. Ethan's first big break came when he applied for a project manager position at Westbridge. Claire knew her father's company owned 14% of Westbridge at the time. She also knew Thomas could have made one phone call and guaranteed Ethan the job. She refused to let him. Ethan earned the position himself. Claire was proud of him. Then he became good at it. Very good. He was persuasive, organized, and relentless. Senior executives noticed, bonuses grew, invitations arrived, their social world changed. At first, Ethan brought Claire everywhere. He introduced her proudly. "This woman believed in me when I had nothing," he would say. But little changes began. He suggested she buy better clothes for events. Then he stopped suggesting and started criticizing. "You can't wear that again." "What's wrong with the Honda?" Claire asked once. "Nothing if you're a teacher in Vermont." "I like my car." "You don't understand how people judge you." Claire smiled sadly. "I understand more than you think." Ethan did not hear the warning. He started using the word image. Image mattered at work. Image mattered at dinners. Image mattered with clients. Soon, image mattered more than gratitude. And then Vanessa Pierce entered his life. Vanessa was 29, beautiful, fearless, and accustomed to attention. Her father, Richard Pierce, had been CEO of Westbridge for 8 years. Richard was not the owner, though Ethan assumed he practically was. Westbridge was privately held by several investment groups and legacy shareholders. Richard controlled day-to-day operations, and to an employee like Ethan, that looked like ultimate power. Vanessa understood this perception and enjoyed it. She had no official executive position, but she appeared at company events, charity galas, and private dinners. People treated her carefully because they believed access to Vanessa meant access to Richard. Ethan met her during a development conference in New York. Claire had planned to attend, but her father had suffered a mild stroke 2 days earlier. Ethan did not know the full truth about Thomas's health or identity. Claire told him she needed to stay with her father. Ethan was irritated. "This matters for my career. My father is in the hospital." "I know, I'm just saying I need you there." "I need to be here." He went alone. Vanessa sat beside him at dinner. By midnight, they were drinking at the hotel bar. By 2 in the morning, Ethan had told her more about his frustrations with Claire than he had told Claire herself. "She's a good person," he said, "but she doesn't want more." Vanessa tilted her head. "Maybe she can't imagine more." That sentence stayed with him. It allowed him to transform Claire's contentment into inadequacy. The affair began 6 weeks later. At first, Ethan felt guilty. Then Vanessa made him feel chosen. She talked about the future as if wealth and status were inevitable. "My father notices you," she said. "Really? He thinks you're sharp." Ethan's entire face changed. Vanessa saw it. She began feeding his ambition in careful doses. A promotion might open soon. A senior vice president might retire. Richard valued loyalty. Family loyalty even more. Ethan never asked Vanessa to marry him. He never needed to. She simply made the path obvious. And Ethan followed it. While he was beginning an affair, Claire was sitting beside her father's hospital bed. Thomas's stroke had been mild, but his doctors warned that stress was becoming dangerous. One evening, he asked Claire about Ethan. She hesitated. That was enough. "What happened?" he asked. "Nothing yet." Thomas studied his daughter's face. "You always defend people until they make it impossible." Claire looked out the window. "He's changing. Money. Proximity to it." Thomas nodded as if this confirmed an old fear. Then he said something Claire did not expect. "I'm transferring voting control of my Westbridge shares to you." Claire turned dead. "I should have done it years ago. I don't want to run Westbridge." "You don't have to, but Richard is becoming reckless." Thomas explained that Bennett Capital's ownership had quietly increased through several transactions. Combined with voting rights held by a family trust, Claire would soon control 28% of Westbridge, the largest single voting bloc in the company. Richard Pierce controlled only 9% personally. The board respected him because Thomas had supported him. That support was ending. Why now? Claire asked. Because you see people clearly. Claire almost laughed. If that were true, my marriage wouldn't be falling apart. Thomas reached for her hand. No, sometimes seeing clearly takes time because love keeps wiping the glass. 3 months later, Thomas died unexpectedly from a second stroke. Ethan attended the funeral. He stood beside Claire, held her hand, and played the role of devoted husband perfectly. He left the reception early. He told Claire he had an emergency meeting. He went to Vanessa's apartment. That was the night Claire stopped hoping. She knew because his location appeared on an old tablet still connected to his account. She stared at the address. She knew it belonged to Vanessa. Claire did not call him. She turned off the tablet, went upstairs, and opened the safe where she kept her father's final letter. It contained one sentence she read 3 times. Never spend your life proving your value to someone who benefits from pretending not to see it. The next morning, Claire called a divorce attorney. Ethan mistook her silence for weakness. That was his first serious mistake. His second was believing Vanessa loved him. Vanessa loved winning. And to her, Ethan was partly a man and partly proof that she could take something from another woman. Once Claire stopped fighting for the marriage, Vanessa lost some interest. Ethan did not notice. He was too busy imagining his new life. He began looking at apartments downtown. He talked about trading his car for a German sedan. He told friends the divorce was mutual. He said Claire wanted a simpler life. He even convinced himself he had been brave enough to choose happiness. 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Westbridge announced a special board meeting. Ethan heard rumors all morning. Richard Pierce planned a major restructuring. A new executive position might be created. Several people believed Ethan was being considered. Vanessa encouraged the rumor. Wear the charcoal suit, she told him over breakfast. Ethan smiled. You know something. I always know something. She leaned across the table and kissed him. Today could change your life. She was right. At 11:45, Ethan received an email from Richard's assistant asking him to present a financial summary at the board meeting. He nearly shouted. Ordinary managers were not invited into closed board sessions. This was it. The room he had been chasing for years was finally opening. He called Vanessa. She laughed happily. I told you. Ethan thought about Claire for half a second. Then he dismissed the thought. Some people were meant to remain part of your past. At 12:30, Ethan entered the executive conference room on the 42nd floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Boston Harbor. A 20-foot walnut table filled the center of the room. Senior executives sat along both sides. Richard Pierce stood near the windows speaking quietly with the general counsel. Ethan recognized almost everyone. Then he saw the woman seated at the head of the table. For one strange second, his mind refused to understand what his eyes were seeing. Claire. She wore a navy suit he had never seen before. Her hair was pinned back. A leather folder rested in front of her. She was speaking to one of Westbridge's oldest directors, who leaned toward her with the respectful attention Ethan had spent years trying to earn. Ethan stopped walking. His presentation folder nearly slipped from his hand. Claire looked up. Their eyes met. She did not look surprised. She had known he would be there. Richard noticed Ethan's expression. Mr. Cole. Ethan swallowed, sorry. His eyes returned to Claire. What is she doing here? Silence spread across the room. Richard's face tightened. Claire said nothing. The general counsel slowly removed his glasses. Ethan realized too late how the question sounded. I mean, Claire is my ex-wife. One of the directors frowned. Yes, he said, we're aware. Ethan looked around the table. Then why is she? Richard cut him off. Mrs. Bennett is here as chair of Bennett Capital and controlling representative of the Bennett Family Trust. Ethan stared at him. The words made no sense. Bennett Capital. Richard nodded. Claire's maiden name was Bennett. Ethan knew that. He had simply never connected it to the investment company, whose name appeared in annual reports. His mouth became dry. The director beside Claire spoke calmly. Bennett Capital is Westbridge's largest shareholder. Ethan looked at Claire again. She had not moved. Largest, he repeated. Claire finally spoke. 28% voting control. Her voice was quiet. That made it worse. Ethan felt heat rush into his face. You own 28% of Westbridge. I control it. You never told me. Claire's expression did not change. This is a board meeting, Ethan. Richard stepped between them verbally. We should begin. Ethan barely heard him. 9 years of memories were collapsing into new meanings. Claire's father worked in real estate. Her family was comfortable. The quiet phone calls. The times she knew things about development projects before they became public. Her calmness around wealthy executives. Her complete lack of fascination with money. He had interpreted all of it as ignorance. It had been familiarity. Claire had not been impressed by his new world because it had never been new to her. Ethan's stomach turned. He took the empty chair assigned to him. The meeting began. And the nightmare deepened. Claire was not there simply to observe. She was there because Bennett Capital had ordered an independent review of several Westbridge projects after discovering irregular financial reporting and questionable vendor contracts. One of those projects belonged to Ethan. His heart began pounding. He had not stolen money, but he had approved inflated consulting fees for a firm Vanessa recommended. He had ignored procurement rules. He had signed documents without proper review because Vanessa told him her father wanted the deals moved quickly. Ethan had believed he was demonstrating loyalty. Now outside counsel was describing those same actions as serious governance failures. Claire never looked at him while the attorney spoke. Richard became increasingly defensive. These were operational decisions, he said. The attorney replied, operational decisions that benefited companies connected to your daughter. Ethan looked at Richard. Then at Claire. Then at the documents in front of him. He understood. Vanessa's access had not been a path upward. He had been useful. A manager willing to sign what powerful people placed in front of him. The board questioned him for 43 minutes. By the end, his shirt was damp beneath his jacket. He admitted Vanessa had personally encouraged several approvals. Richard's face turned cold. Claire asked only one direct question. Did you ever verify that Mr. Pierce had authorized the instructions you said came through Vanessa? Ethan looked at her. He could hear the history beneath the question. Did you verify anything? Did you question what you wanted to believe? Did you ever look carefully at the person in front of you? No, Ethan said. Claire nodded once. Thank you. At 3:15, the board placed Ethan on administrative leave pending investigation. At 3:20, Richard Pierce was asked to temporarily step aside as CEO. At 3:30, Vanessa called Ethan 13 times. He did not answer until he reached the parking garage. What did you say in there? She demanded. Ethan laughed once, but there was no humor in it. You knew. I knew what? Claire. Silence. Ethan pressed the phone harder against his ear. You knew who she was. Vanessa exhaled. I knew her family had investments. You knew Bennett Capital was hers. Not hers exactly. She controls the largest voting bloc in the company. Vanessa said nothing. Ethan closed his eyes. You knew. I suspected. And you let me sit there talking about how poor she was. Vanessa's voice hardened. That was your opinion, Ethan. You encouraged it. I didn't make you hate your wife. The words struck him harder than shouting would have. Vanessa continued. I didn't make you cheat. I didn't make you sign anything. Don't suddenly pretend you were manipulated into every bad decision you made. The call ended 30 seconds later. That night, Ethan sat alone in the house Claire had given him. For the first time, it did not feel like a prize. It felt like evidence. He walked through the kitchen and noticed things she had left behind because he had never valued them. A chipped coffee mug from their first apartment. A magnet from a road trip to Maine. A handwritten recipe from his mother taped inside a cabinet door. Claire had taken almost nothing. Ethan had assumed she could not afford movers. Now he understood. She had left the house because she did not need it. Maybe she never wanted it. Maybe she gave it to him because it was the kind of thing he had chosen over her. He poured a drink. Then another. At midnight, he searched Claire's name online. For years, very little had appeared because she maintained a private life. Now business publications were reporting the Westbridge shakeup. CLAIR BNNETT, ASSUMES active role AT BNNETT capital after founder's death. WSTBRIDGES, largest shareholder demands governance review. Private heiress steps into public view. He clicked one article. There was a photograph of Claire beside her father from 5 years earlier. The caption described Thomas Bennett as a billionaire real estate investor. Ethan stared at the word billionaire. His hands began to shake. Not because he had lost access to the money. That realization would come later and shame him. At first, what destroyed him was understanding how completely he had failed to know his own wife. Claire had trusted him enough to live beside him without proving anything. He had repaid that trust by deciding her simplicity made her inferior. He called her. No answer. He called again. Then he texted. We need to talk. Nothing. He wrote another. Why didn't you tell me? 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. 10 minutes later, Claire replied. Because I wanted to know who you were when money wasn't part of the answer. Ethan stared at the message until the screen dimmed. The next morning, he drove to Bennett Capital's offices. Security would not let him upstairs. He asked them to call Claire. They did. She declined to see him. He waited in the lobby for almost 2 hours. At 11:20, Claire walked out of the elevator with 2 attorneys and an older woman Ethan recognized from the board. He stood quickly. Claire. She stopped. Her colleagues looked at her. It's all right, she said. Give me a minute. They moved away. Ethan stepped closer. I just need 5 minutes. You have one. He flinched. I didn't know. Claire looked tired rather than angry. That seems to be the sentence everyone uses when consequences arrive. I mean about your family, about the company, about any of it. I know. Why would you hide something that big from your husband? Claire's eyes sharpened. I did not hide another marriage from you. I did not hide another person in our bed. I kept my family finances private because I wanted one relationship in my life that wasn't shaped by them. Ethan lowered his voice. You should have trusted me. I did. The answer stopped him. Claire continued, I trusted you with the version of me that had nothing to offer you except herself. You told me exactly what you thought that version was worth. Ethan looked away. People crossed the lobby behind them. I made mistakes. You made choices. I was stupid. And yes, I thought Vanessa. Don't blame Vanessa for decisions you made while wearing your own wedding ring. Ethan closed his mouth. Claire had never spoken to him like this. Not loudly. Not cruelly. Just clearly. He realized clarity was far more painful. Was any of it real? He asked. Claire's face changed. For the first time, sadness broke through her composure. All of it was real to me. That hurt more than if she had said no. He took a step closer. Then maybe we can. No. She said it gently. Ethan's voice cracked. You don't even know what I was going to say. Yes, I do. Claire looked at him for several seconds. You want to know whether the door is still open, because now you understand what was behind it. That's not fair. Neither was making me feel ashamed for living modestly while you were sleeping with someone else. Ethan looked down. Claire's voice softened. If you had discovered I was deeply in debt yesterday, would you be standing here today? He opened his mouth. No answer came. Claire nodded. That is why there is nothing to discuss. She walked away. Ethan did not follow. His suspension lasted 3 weeks. The investigation concluded that he had violated procurement policy and failed to disclose a personal relationship that created a conflict of interest. He was terminated. Westbridge did not accuse him of criminal conduct, but the language in his separation agreement was enough to poison his reputation in the industry. Richard Pierce resigned as CEO. Vanessa disappeared to Europe before the final board report was released. She sent Ethan one message. I'm sorry things became complicated. That was the last he heard from her. For the first time in more than a decade, Ethan was unemployed. He still had savings. He still had the house. But the life he had built his identity around vanished quickly. Invitations stopped. People who once laughed too loudly at his jokes stopped returning calls. Former colleagues who had called him brilliant now said they were keeping their distance. Ethan discovered that status had a short memory. Claire did not contact him. Months passed. He watched her from a distance through business news. She became acting chair of Westbridge during the search for a new CEO. Then she shocked analysts by declining a permanent executive role. Instead, she pushed for governance reforms, sold several risky assets, and created an employee housing fund in her father's name. The business press called her disciplined. Employees called her fair. Ethan remembered telling her she had no ambition. He laughed aloud the first time he thought about it. Then he cried. His regret did not arrive all at once. It came in ordinary moments. At the grocery store, when he reached automatically for the tea Claire liked. During a thunderstorm, when he remembered how she used to open the bedroom window because she loved the smell of rain. On his birthday, when no one remembered the chocolate cake his mother used to make except Claire. When he found a box in the basement labeled ETHAN certificates and discovered Claire had saved every training award, every promotion letter, every article that mentioned him. At the bottom was a note she had written years earlier. I hope one day he sees himself the way I see him. Ethan sat on the basement floor for nearly an hour. That sentence ruined him. Claire had seen greatness in him before he had money. He had gained status and somehow become smaller. A year after the divorce, Ethan sold the house. He could no longer stand living inside the museum of his own choices. He moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Worcester and took a job with a small construction firm. The salary was less than half of what he had earned at Westbridge. At first, humiliation burned through him every morning. Then something strange happened. He began to become useful again. There were no galas, no private dining rooms, no executives' daughters promising shortcuts. Just permits, budgets, schedules, weather delays, contractors, and people who cared whether he kept his word. His new boss, Miguel Alvarez, was 62 and unimpressed by Ethan's old title. On Ethan's first day, Miguel handed him a hard hat. "I don't care what floor your old office was on," he said. "Here, if you promise Tuesday, you deliver Tuesday." Ethan needed that. Over time, regret stopped feeling like punishment and began feeling like instruction. He started therapy. He apologized to people he had treated poorly. He visited his father more often. He stopped telling the story of his divorce as something that happened to him. He began saying, "I destroyed my marriage because I cared more about what strangers thought of my life than about the person who built it with me." It was not a sentence that earned sympathy. That was why it mattered. Claire changed too. For years, she had mistaken endurance for loyalty. After the divorce, she realized how often she had made herself smaller to protect Ethan's pride. She had hidden not only her money, but her confidence, connections, and influence. Not because Ethan demanded it at first. Because she wanted the marriage to feel equal. Eventually, equality became self-erasure. Her closest friend, Rachel, confronted her one evening. "You know what bothers me," Rachel said. Claire smiled. "There's a list. You spent years making sure Ethan never felt intimidated by you. I wanted him to feel secure. He was supposed to build security inside himself. You weren't supposed to become less visible to provide it." Claire thought about that for weeks. She began speaking publicly about family business and responsible ownership. She funded scholarships for first-generation college students entering construction management. She sold the enormous family estate her father had rarely used and converted part of the property into a retreat center for families dealing with long-term illness. She kept her Honda for another year. Then it finally died in a grocery store parking lot. Rachel laughed for 10 minutes when Claire called. "You control hundreds of millions of dollars, and you are waiting for a tow truck beside a 12-year-old Honda." Claire laughed too. "My father would be proud." "Your mechanic is definitely not." Claire eventually bought a new car. Not a supercar. Not a limousine. A comfortable SUV. She paid cash and felt no need to explain it to anyone. 2 years after the divorce, Ethan saw Claire in person again. It happened at a charity event for affordable housing. His company had donated labor to one of the projects. Miguel insisted Ethan attend. Ethan almost refused when he learned Bennett Capital was the lead sponsor. Then he decided avoidance was another form of cowardice. Claire stood near the stage speaking with a group of city officials. She looked different. Not richer. Freer. That was worse. Ethan watched her laugh at something a woman beside her said. For years he had believed Claire's quietness meant she lacked confidence. Now he saw the truth. She had simply never needed to dominate a room. When Claire noticed him, surprise crossed her face. Then she smiled politely. "Ethan." "Hi." They stood awkwardly for a moment. "You look well," he said. "So do you." He smiled. "That's generous." "No, you look different." "I am." Claire studied him. Ethan resisted the urge to explain himself. That was another thing therapy had taught him. Change did not become real because you announced it. He nodded toward a display showing the housing project. "My company is doing the framing on phase 2. "I know." "You know." "I approved the contractor list." Ethan laughed softly. "Of course you did." Claire smiled. For the first time since their divorce, the space between them did not feel filled with anger. Only history. Ethan took a breath. I owe you an apology that doesn't ask for anything. Claire's expression became serious. You already apologized. Not correctly. He looked at the floor, then back at her. I used to think regret meant wishing I had made a different decision because my life would have turned out better. But that was still selfish. Claire listened. Ethan continued. I regret what I did because of what it did to you. I made the person who loved me feel like she was something I needed to outgrow. I betrayed you while you were grieving your father. I blamed you for the emptiness I was creating myself. And when I learned about your money, my first instinct was still to make your secrecy the problem instead of my behavior. Claire's eyes filled slightly. Ethan's voice became quieter. You didn't deserve any of it, I'm sorry. Claire looked away for a moment. When she looked back, she nodded. Thank you. He swallowed. I don't expect forgiveness. I forgave you a long time ago. Hope flashed across his face before he could stop it. Claire saw it. She added gently, forgiveness is not the same as return. The hope disappeared. Ethan nodded. I know. And this time he did. A man approached from across the room. He was around Claire's age, wearing a simple gray suit. Ethan recognized him as Daniel Cho, an architect whose firm worked on several Bennett projects. Daniel stopped beside Claire. There you are, they're ready for you backstage. Claire introduced them. Daniel, this is Ethan Cole. Ethan, Daniel Cho. The men shook hands. Daniel was warm and completely unthreatened. That detail stayed with Ethan. He noticed the way Daniel looked at Claire. Not like an asset. Not like a mystery. Like a person he respected. Ethan did not ask whether they were together. He did not need to. Claire excused herself. Before she walked away, Ethan said, Claire. She turned. I'm glad you're happy. She looked at him carefully. Then she smiled. I hope you become happy too. It was kinder than he deserved. He watched her leave with Daniel. The old Ethan would have measured Daniel immediately. His suit. His watch. His status. The new Ethan noticed none of those things. He noticed only that Claire looked peaceful beside him. For a moment, the loss hurt so sharply Ethan had to breathe through it. Then Miguel appeared beside him, holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. You look like you just got hit by a truck. Ethan accepted one. Old accident. Miguel glanced toward Claire. Your ex-wife. And yes. The one you told me about. And yes. Miguel whistled softly. You really were an idiot. Ethan laughed. An extraordinary one. Miguel raised his glass. To recovery from stupidity. Ethan touched his glass to Miguel's. I'll drink to that. 5 years passed. Claire became known less for inherited wealth than for what she did with it. Bennett Capital shifted aggressively toward workforce housing, sustainable development, and employee ownership programs. Westbridge recovered under new leadership. Richard Pierce moved to Florida and disappeared from public business life. Vanessa married a technology investor, divorced him 18 months later, and became a regular subject of lifestyle magazines. Ethan stopped reading anything about her. He became a partner in Miguel's company. They expanded carefully. No shortcuts. No hidden relationships. No deals approved because someone important whispered in his ear. Ethan earned less money than he once dreamed of making. He slept better. On a cold November afternoon, he received an envelope at the office. Inside was an invitation to the opening of the Thomas Bennett Community Housing Center. At the bottom, beneath the printed details, someone had written a short note by hand. Your team helped build this, you should be there. Claire. Ethan attended. The center was beautiful without being extravagant. Families toured new apartments. Children ran through hallways carrying balloons. A photograph of Thomas Bennett hung near the entrance. Below it was a quotation. Wealth is not measured by what remains in your hands. It is measured by what becomes possible because you opened them. Ethan stood in front of the words for a long time. Claire found him there. He said that all the time, she said. Ethan smiled. I wish I had met him properly. You did meet him. I mean, really met him. I was always too busy trying to impress people. Claire nodded. They walked through the lobby together. Daniel was there, now Claire's husband. They had married quietly the previous spring. Ethan had learned about it from a mutual friend. The news hurt, but it did not destroy him. That was how he knew he had finally accepted the difference between regret and entitlement. He could regret losing Claire without believing she still belonged to him. Near the end of the event, Claire and Ethan stood outside beneath a row of bare maple trees. Snow threatened in the gray sky. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had told me? Ethan asked. Claire considered the question. Sometimes. Do you think I would have been different? I don't know. He nodded. I think about it too. Claire looked at him. Ethan gave a sad smile. I used to tell myself I would have treated you better if I had known. Then I realized that was the worst answer possible. Claire's eyes softened. And yes, if knowing you were rich was what I needed in order to value you, then I never valued you enough. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Claire said, that is the lesson. Ethan looked back at the building, filled with families beginning new lives. I learned it late. Late is not the same as never. He smiled. That sounds like something your father would say. It is. A car pulled up for Claire. Daniel waved from the passenger seat. Claire stepped toward it, then stopped. Ethan. Yes. I'm glad you changed. He felt something tighten in his throat. Me too. She got into the car. Ethan watched it disappear down the street. He did not imagine chasing it. He did not imagine Claire turning around. Some endings were not doors waiting to reopen. They were mirrors. They existed so you could finally see the person you had been and decide whether to remain that person. Ethan had spent years believing success meant being invited into expensive rooms. He had believed wealth made people important. He had believed appearances revealed value. And because of those beliefs, he betrayed the one person who had loved him when there was nothing impressive to see. Claire had never needed his success. She had never needed his salary. She had never needed his connections. She had chosen him when he had none of those things. That was the wealth he failed to recognize. The money had only exposed the mistake. Years later, when people asked Ethan about the most expensive thing he ever lost, he never mentioned his old job, his executive salary, or the future he once imagined inside Westbridge Holdings. He thought about a small gold wedding ring sitting on a conference table on a rainy morning. He thought about Claire saying, "So you remember what you traded." And he understood at last. He had not traded a poor wife for a rich woman. He had traded loyalty for image, peace for status, love for approval. And by the time he learned the difference, regret was the only thing left that still belonged to him. But regret, if a person was willing to face it honestly, did not have to be the end. It could become a warning. A warning that the person beside you may be carrying sacrifices you never notice. A warning that quiet people are not necessarily powerless. A warning that money does not change character as often as it reveals it. And most of all, a warning that if you wait until someone walks away to recognize their value, you may eventually become a better person. You just may not become better in time to keep them. There was one part of Ethan's story that almost nobody knew. 3 months after he lost his job at Westbridge, his father came to visit. Robert Cole had spent 35 years repairing elevators. He had never owned an expensive watch. He had never sat in a corporate boardroom. He still kept $20 bills folded behind his driver's license because he did not trust machines to work when people needed them most. Ethan had spent much of his adult life quietly trying not to become him. Not because Robert was cruel. Because he was ordinary. When Ethan was young, ordinary had felt safe. Later, it began to feel like failure. Robert arrived at Ethan's house carrying a paper bag of groceries. "I brought soup," he said. "I have food. Your refrigerator has mustard, beer, and something that used to be lettuce." Ethan stepped aside. His father walked into the kitchen and began unpacking without asking permission. For 10 minutes, neither man spoke about Westbridge. Then Robert noticed the divorce ring still lying in a small dish near the kitchen window. He picked it up. "Claire's." Ethan nodded. "She left it." Robert turned the ring slowly between his fingers. "She called me after the divorce." Ethan looked up sharply. "What?" "She wanted to make sure I had someone checking on my blood pressure. Said you might be distracted for a while." Ethan stared at him. "After I cheated on her, she called you." Robert placed the ring back down. "Claire wasn't married to me. You were. Whatever happened between you two, she still cared whether I was alive." Shame spread through Ethan's chest. His father opened the soup container and poured it into a pot. "You know," Robert said, "when your mother was dying, Claire drove her to every appointment you couldn't make." "I know." "No, you know the fact. I'm not sure you ever knew what it meant." Ethan said nothing. Robert turned the stove on. "Your mother was scared. She tried not to show it to us. She showed it to Claire." Ethan swallowed. "She never told me that." "Because your wife knew the difference between helping and collecting credit." The sentence landed with brutal precision. Ethan sat at the kitchen table. "I know I ruined it." Robert looked at him. "Do you?" "I lost my wife, I lost my job. Everyone knows what happened." His father shook his head. "That's not what I asked." Ethan frowned. Robert lowered the heat under the soup. "You keep talking about what you lost. Your wife, your job, your reputation. That's still you standing in the center of the story." Ethan felt irritation rise. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to understand what she lost." The room became still. Robert continued. "She lost the man she thought you were. She lost 9 years. She lost the person she expected to grow old with. And from what you told me, she found out while she was burying her father." Ethan looked down. "Yeah." "So stop asking why she didn't tell you she was rich. Start asking why, when she was grieving, you gave her one more thing to survive." Ethan's eyes burned. Robert had never spoken to him this harshly. But his father did not sound angry. He sounded disappointed. "That was worse." "I thought I deserved more," Ethan whispered. Robert pulled out a chair and sat opposite him. "More what?" "I don't know, respect, a bigger life, people noticing me." Robert nodded slowly. "When you were 10, you used to sit on the floor of my truck and hand me tools. Remember?" Ethan smiled faintly. "You weren't supposed to let me do that." "Probably not." "You paid me $5. You were overpaid." For the first time in weeks, Ethan laughed. Robert leaned back. "You were proud of me then." "I still am." "No, for a while you weren't." Ethan's smile disappeared. His father was right. At company dinners, Ethan had avoided talking about Robert's job. If someone asked what his father did, he said he worked in mechanical systems. He made it sound managerial. Robert knew. Of course he knew. "I was embarrassed," Ethan admitted. "I know. I'm sorry." Robert shrugged. I fix elevators, they go up and down. People can call it whatever they want. Then he pointed toward Ethan. But you spent so much time trying to go up that you forgot going up isn't the same as becoming better. The words stayed with Ethan for years. That evening, after his father left, Ethan took Claire's ring from the dish and put it inside a small wooden box. Not as a symbol that she would return. As a reminder that love could be lost long before money disappeared. Meanwhile, Claire was facing a different kind of reckoning. Stepping into Bennett Capital publicly brought attention she had spent her entire adult life avoiding. Reporters waited outside offices. Business magazines requested profiles. People she barely remembered from college sent messages congratulating her. Former acquaintances suddenly wanted lunch. Men who had ignored her at Westbridge events began requesting introductions. Claire discovered that her father's warning had been painfully accurate. Money did not only attract greed. It distorted memory. People rewrote the past to position themselves closer to wealth. One woman Claire had met twice told a magazine they had been close friends for years. A former coworker claimed he had always known Claire was destined for leadership. He had once refused to let her lead a small client presentation because he said she lacked executive presence. Claire found the entire performance exhausting. One afternoon, Rachel walked into her office holding a luxury gift basket nearly 4 feet tall. "What is that?" Claire asked. "A man named Gregory sent it." "Who is Gregory?" "Exactly." Rachel placed it on the floor. "There are truffles, champagne, some kind of imported honey, and a note saying he always admired your quiet strength." Claire stared at her. "Do I know him?" "You attended the same fundraiser 8 years ago." Claire groaned. Rachel laughed. "You wanted to know what people value. Congratulations, the experiment has expanded." Claire did not laugh. Rachel's expression softened. "Hey, sometimes I wonder if hiding it was wrong." "Your money." "From Ethan." Rachel sat down. "Do you think he would have cheated if he'd known?" Claire looked out the window. "I don't know. That isn't the important question." "I know." "Say it anyway." Claire sighed. "The important question is whether I want a marriage where money is the reason someone stays." "Exactly." Claire rubbed her forehead. "What if I created the test and then resented him for failing it?" Rachel considered that carefully. "You didn't tell him you were poor, you lived below your means. Those aren't the same thing." "I let him assume." He also let himself assume that ordinary meant worthless. Claire looked at her friend. Rachel continued. "You're allowed to examine your own choices. That's healthy. But don't use self-awareness as a new way to carry his responsibility." That sentence became important to Claire. For months after the divorce, she had wondered whether complete honesty about her wealth might have changed everything. Eventually, she accepted a harder truth. Perhaps it would have. But a marriage preserved by the knowledge of an inheritance would not have been the marriage she thought she had. There was another secret Claire had never told Ethan. 2 years before Thomas died, he had offered to buy the couple a house outright. Claire refused. At the time, Ethan and Claire were saving for a down payment. Ethan was working weekends. Claire was taking extra consulting projects. Thomas hated seeing them struggle. "I can solve this with one wire transfer," he told Claire. "And then Ethan will know." "You could tell him." "Not yet." Thomas had looked worried. "Why not?" Claire searched for an answer. "Because he's proud of building this with me." Pride can be healthy. "I know. And it can become hunger." Claire remembered rolling her eyes. "Dad, not every ambitious person is corrupt." "I didn't say corrupt." Thomas looked out the window of his study. "I said hungry. Hunger makes people stop tasting what they already have. Claire had defended Ethan. He loves me. I hope he always does. Thomas never said more. After his death, Claire found a folder in his desk labeled C. Inside were legal documents, letters, and notes he had written over the years. One note was dated shortly after Ethan's first promotion. Ethan is becoming impressed by rooms instead of people. I hope he remembers which one opened the door. Claire cried when she read it. Not because Thomas had been right. Because he had seen her future approaching, and loved her enough not to force her to see it before she was ready. The Westbridge investigation also revealed something Claire chose never to tell Ethan. Richard Pierce had not planned to promote him. Vanessa had lied. There was no senior executive role waiting. In internal emails, Richard described Ethan as talented but too eager to please senior management. He had no intention of making him part of the executive team. Vanessa had used the possibility of promotion to keep Ethan cooperative. When Claire first read the emails, anger nearly overwhelmed her. She imagined forwarding them to Ethan with one line. "This is what you destroyed us for." She did not. Rachel asked why. "Because I don't want his regret to depend on discovering Vanessa didn't love him," Claire said. "What do you want it to depend on?" "Knowing that I did." That distinction mattered. If Ethan regretted the affair only because Vanessa had manipulated him, then he had learned nothing. If he regretted it because betrayal was wrong even when the other person genuinely wanted him, then perhaps something in him might still grow. Claire no longer needed to be present for that growth. But she hoped it happened. Not for herself. For whatever people came into Ethan's life next. Ethan learned about the fake promotion months later through a former colleague. He was sitting in a small diner near his apartment when the colleague, Marcus, mentioned it casually. "You knew Pierce wasn't going to promote you, right?" Ethan froze. "What?" Marcus looked uncomfortable. "I assumed you found out during the review." "No." "Vanessa told everyone you were up for senior VP, but Richard never put your name forward." Ethan stared at the coffee in front of him. Marcus cursed under his breath. "Sorry, I thought you knew." Ethan laughed quietly. For a few seconds, Marcus looked afraid he might lose control. Instead, Ethan leaned back. "All that for nothing." Marcus misunderstood. "You would have gotten another promotion eventually." Ethan shook his head. "No, I mean all of it. I kept telling myself I was sacrificing things for a future that was almost here." He looked through the diner window. But there wasn't even a future. That night, Ethan almost called Claire again. He wanted to tell her he finally understood how completely Vanessa had deceived him. Then he stopped. He heard Claire's voice in his memory. "Don't blame Vanessa for decisions you made while wearing your own wedding ring." So instead of calling Claire, Ethan opened his laptop and wrote a letter he never sent. "Claire, today I learned the promotion was never real. My first feeling was anger at Vanessa. My second was embarrassment. My third was worse, relief. For a few seconds, I wanted the lie to excuse me. I wanted to say I destroyed our marriage because I had been manipulated. But I know better now. Nobody manipulated me into believing your clothes made you less sophisticated. Nobody forced me to compare you to women at company dinners. Nobody made me treat your contentment like failure. Those ideas were already inside me. Vanessa only gave them permission to speak louder. You were right not to take that responsibility from me. I hope someday I become the man you thought you married." "Ethan." He printed the letter. Then he put it in the wooden box beside the ring. The box slowly filled over the next several years. Not with messages meant to win Claire back. With reminders of things Ethan needed to learn. His first therapy receipt. A photograph of his father standing beside an elevator control panel, grinning proudly. the business card Miguel gave him on the day he was hired. A copy of the first construction contract Ethan completed without a single ethics exception. And eventually, a photograph from the community housing center opening. In the photograph, Ethan was standing near the edge of the crowd. Claire was at the center cutting a ribbon. Daniel stood beside her. For once, Ethan did not look at the picture and imagine replacing Daniel. He saw a chapter that had ended and another that had begun. That realization took years. Claire's relationship with Daniel began slowly. They first met through a design review for one of Bennett Capital's housing projects. Daniel disagreed with her in their first meeting. Not rudely, not strategically. He simply thought one of the proposed building layouts was wrong. Most people around Claire had become careful after learning how much power she held. Daniel was not. "This courtyard looks beautiful in a rendering," he said, "but it'll become a wind tunnel in January." One executive glanced nervously at Claire. Claire studied the plans. "You're sure?" "I grew up 3 blocks from a project built exactly like this. In winter, old people stopped using the center because crossing the courtyard was miserable." Claire nodded. "Redesign it." After the meeting, Daniel apologized if he had sounded blunt. Claire smiled. "Please don't start apologizing for telling me the truth. I have enough people doing the opposite." They became friends. Daniel did not ask about her net worth. He did not seem impressed by private jets because he disliked flying in anything. He drove an old pickup truck because he used it for site visits. The first time Claire saw the inside, she laughed at the mountain of blueprints, coffee cups, and safety vests. "You're judging me," he said. "I'm wondering if something lives under those drawings." Several things may. With Daniel, Claire discovered how different security felt from admiration. He challenged her without competing with her. He celebrated her success without making it about himself. When tabloids briefly became interested in their relationship, Daniel's biggest complaint was that a photographer captured him carrying a terrible umbrella. "I've had that umbrella for 12 years, he said. "It shows. You're very judgmental for someone who kept a Honda until it died in a parking lot." Claire laughed until she cried. That laughter surprised her. For a long time after Ethan, she had believed healing would feel like becoming stronger. Instead, it often felt like becoming lighter. When Daniel proposed, he did it in the kitchen of their apartment while pasta water boiled over on the stove. No cameras. No expensive restaurant. No audience. Claire looked at the ring and began laughing. Daniel looked alarmed. "That's not generally the response." "No, I'm sorry." She wiped her eyes. "My first husband apologized because his ring wasn't expensive enough." Daniel looked at the simple ring he had chosen. "Should I be worried?" Claire shook her head. "No, that's why I'm laughing." Then she said yes. On their wedding day, Claire wore her mother's earrings and carried no visible sign of wealth beyond the happiness on her face. They married at the same lakeside inn where she had married Ethan years earlier. Rachel questioned the choice. "Are you sure?" Claire was. "I don't want a bad ending to own a beautiful place." That sentence captured how Claire had learned to live. She did not erase the past. She refused to surrender everything it had touched. Ethan, in his own way, eventually did the same. He stopped avoiding the restaurants he and Claire once loved. He stopped changing the radio station when their old wedding song played. He even drove past the lakeside in one autumn afternoon. He parked nearby and walked down to the water. For a while, he remembered the young man who had stood there beside Claire, believing love was the greatest luck he would ever receive. That young man had been right. He simply had not stayed grateful long enough. Ethan sat on a bench and watched leaves move across the lake. He imagined speaking to his younger self. He did not say, don't cheat or you'll lose a billionaire. He did not say, stay married and you'll become rich. He said something simpler. When she believes in you before the world does, don't punish her once the world catches up. When she lives simply, don't mistake peace for lack of ambition. When success enters your life, make sure gratitude enters with it. And if someone loves you when there is nothing to gain, never make them prove why they are worth keeping. Ethan remained on the bench until the sun disappeared behind the trees. Then he stood and went home. The wooden box with Claire's ring stayed in his closet. He never threw it away. He never wore the ring. He never showed it to anyone he dated later. It was not a shrine to Claire. It was a record of a lesson purchased at a price no money could refund. And perhaps that was the final irony. Ethan once believed Claire's hidden fortune was the greatest secret in their marriage. It wasn't. The greatest secret was how rich his life had already been before he knew anything about the money. He had a wife who believed in him. A father who was proud of honest work. A home filled with ordinary rituals. A future that did not require impressing strangers. He had mistaken all of that for the beginning of success instead of success itself. By the time he understood, Claire had built a new life with someone who never needed a balance sheet to recognize her value. Ethan could not change that. What he could change was the man who walked forward carrying the lesson. Some regrets destroy people. Others reveal them. Ethan's did both before it finally taught him how to live. One final moment came years later when Ethan was asked to speak to a group of young project managers about ethics in business. He almost declined. He did not feel qualified to teach anyone how to make good decisions. Miguel told him that was exactly why he should go. Standing at the front of a small training room, Ethan did not mention Claire's fortune. He did not mention Vanessa's name. He simply told them that careers rarely collapse because of one dramatic decision. They collapse through small permissions people give themselves. One dinner you should not attend. One lie you call harmless. One document you sign because asking questions feels inconvenient. One person at home you begin taking for granted because you believe they will always be there. A young man in the front row asked, "What did it cost you?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "More than my job," he said. He looked around the room. The hardest consequence wasn't losing what I wanted. It was realizing I had already possessed something better and failed to recognize it. Afterward, Ethan walked outside alone. Snow had started falling. Across the street, couples hurried toward restaurants, families loaded groceries into cars, and ordinary people carried on with ordinary evenings. Once, he would have looked at that scene and dreamed of escaping it. Now he understood its beauty. A good life was not always the one strangers envied. Sometimes it was the one you were wise enough to value before it disappeared. Forever remembered. And if this story stayed with you, there are more emotional dramas waiting for you here. On this channel, we share powerful stories about marriage, betrayal, family secrets, hidden wealth, regret, second chances, and the choices that can change a life forever. If you enjoyed Claire and Ethan's story, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue creating longer, deeper stories for you to listen to and enjoy. And before you go, tell us in the comments. If you were Claire, would you ever forgive Ethan after everything he did? Would you give him one final chance, or would you close that chapter forever? There is no perfect answer, and that is what makes stories like this worth talking about. Thank you for spending your time with us. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next story. Until next time, remember this. Sometimes the greatest regret is not losing what you wanted. It is realizing too late that you already had what truly mattered.